What happens when one of cinema's most disciplined and intense performers faces off against one of Hollywood's most outspoken and politically charged figures? What starts as a simple promotional interview quickly transforms into a confrontation for the ages, an exchange so sharp it leaves viewers on the edge of their seats. This isn't just a clash of personalities, it's a full-blown reckoning. In under 20 minutes, Tom Cruise methodically dismantles Jane Fonda's carefully cultivated public image, exposing decades of contradictions and leaving an indelible mark on daytime television history. Imagine a routine publicity stop spiraling into a relentless war of words, where rehearsed lines crumble under the weight of truth, and a famed activist finds herself utterly speechless. This is that moment. Millions of viewers watched in stunned silence as defenses collapsed and years of carefully guarded facades were stripped away, revealing vulnerabilities few could have anticipated. The day began like any other at the View Studios in New York City. Production assistants moved efficiently through their routines, adjusting lights, testing sound, and running through last-minute checks. Makeup artists applied finishing touches while stage managers coordinated timing and transitions. The audience filed in, buzzing with anticipation, especially excited at the knowledge that Tom Cruise, the box office titan, would be making an appearance. Tom Cruise. The name alone commanded attention. Known for decades of cinematic dominance, jaw-dropping stunts executed without doubles, and a legendary dedication to his craft, he was a presence that could electrify any room. When his publicist confirmed the appearance to promote his latest action blockbuster, the producers rejoiced. It was guaranteed ratings gold. But nobody could have foreseen the storm that Jane Fonda was quietly preparing that morning. As Tom entered the studio, the atmosphere shifted. Applause erupted as he moved with that unmistakable coiled energy, a charisma that seemed undiminished by time. His smile was warm, his eyes bright, his tailored suit immaculate. Every movement exuded the confidence of someone who had dominated the silver screen for decades. Whoopi Goldberg greeted him with genuine warmth, shaking his hand firmly and guiding him to the prepared seat. The other hosts followed suit with welcoming smiles, everyone except Jane Fonda. She leaned back, her smile polite but edged, a subtle warning to anyone who might challenge her. Those familiar with her knew that look well. She was bracing for battle. "Tom Cruise, welcome to The View," Whoopi began, her tone light and inviting. "It's always such a pleasure to have you here." "Thank you so much for having me," Tom replied, his signature intensity present even in a casual greeting. "I'm always happy to be here. This show has incredible energy." What followed seemed ordinary at first. Whoopi steered the conversation toward the film, asking about preparation, training, and the challenges of performing at such a high level. Tom leaned in, speaking with that trademark laser focus that had made him compelling both on and off the screen. The audience hung on every word, unaware that the tension was slowly building, setting the stage for a confrontation no one would forget. Tom Cruise leaned in, eyes alight with intensity, speaking with the kind of conviction that made you sit up and listen. "The thing about this character," he said, voice steady but passionate, "is that he stands for something real. Someone who doesn't back down from what's right, no matter the personal cost. That unwavering commitment to principle," he explained, was what drew him to the role, a devotion few could match. But before the warmth of his words could fully settle, Jane Fonda struck. She had been sitting silently, a faint smirk tracing her lips, waiting for the perfect opening. Now she leaned forward, her tone sharp, almost condescending. "That's interesting, Tom," she interjected, cutting off Whoopi's follow-up. "Because I can't help but wonder about someone who talks about doing what's right while being part of an organization with such a questionable history regarding transparency and truthfulness." Instantly, the studio temperature shifted. The audience went quiet, the easy camaraderie of moments before evaporating like mist. Camera operators exchanged rapid, nervous glances. Something significant was about to happen. Tom's smile flickered, a brief, almost imperceptible crack. But then he composed himself. Anyone who knew him, however, recognized that flash in his eyes, the calm before a storm. Whoopi quickly tried to steer the conversation back on track. "Well, let's talk about the incredible action sequences in your film," she said, voice bright but slightly strained. "I understand you did all your own—" "No," Jane interrupted, her tone now fully self-righteous, her confidence swelling. "I think this conversation is far more important. Here we have someone who presents himself as an all-American hero on screen, yet in real life is deeply involved with an organization that former members describe as controlling, manipulative, even dangerous. Don't you think the public deserves honesty, Tom? Don't they deserve the truth?" The audience was silent now, the tension almost unbearable. The other hosts shifted uneasily, wishing they could disappear. Joy Behar looked ready to crawl under the nearest table. Even Whoopi, normally unflappable, seemed momentarily caught off guard. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, Tom Cruz laughed. Not a nervous chuckle or polite deflection, but a deep, genuine laugh that echoed through the tent studio. "Jane," he said, shaking his head slowly, eyes narrowing with a mix of disbelief and quiet disdain. "This is probably the most hypocritical thing I've heard in a very, very long time." Fonda's confident facade faltered. This wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed for. There were no stutters, no defensive excuses, just laughter and a single word: hypocrisy. "Excuse me?" she snapped, voice sharp, the surprise unmistakable. Tom's Hollywood charm began to peel away, revealing a harder, more unyielding edge. "You want to talk about questionable organizations and transparency?" he said, leaning forward, voice calm but piercing. "You want to lecture me about people who appear one way publicly but are something entirely different behind closed doors?" He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, and then delivering a blow that cut through the studio like a knife. "Jane, you literally traveled to North Vietnam during a war where American soldiers were dying. You posed for propaganda photos with the enemy. You gave aid and comfort to people holding American prisoners of war. And now? You want to sit here and lecture me about patriotism, honesty, and transparency?" The room went still. Every eye fixed on him. Every heartbeat seemed louder. What started as a promotional interview had erupted into a historic confrontation, one that no one in the studio or watching at home would ever forget. The studio buzzed with uneasy murmurs. A few audience members gasped audibly while Jane Fonda's face shifted from pale to flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again, grasping desperately for words that wouldn't come. "That was a different time," she finally stammered, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Tom's intensity only sharpened. "A different time?" he repeated slowly, his voice growing colder, sharper, impossible to look away from. "Jane, those weren't just numbers in a newspaper. Those were real people, real families, sons, daughters, brothers, fathers, lost while you were offering comfort to the people shooting at them." He leaned back slightly, eyes locked on her, unblinking. "And you want to question my character?" Joy Behar attempted to intervene, her voice weak and hesitant. "Maybe we should all just take a step back here," she suggested, glancing nervously at the other hosts. But the momentum had already taken over. The confrontation couldn't be stopped. Jane, feeling trapped, lashed out in the only way she knew. "At least I had the courage to stand up for what I believed in," she shot back, voice sharp, trembling with desperation. "At least I wasn't hiding behind some cult-like organization controlling every aspect of my life, telling me what to think and how to act." That was the turning point. Tom Cruise's demeanor shifted instantly. The Hollywood charm, the friendly smile, the promotional persona, all of it vanished. What remained was raw intensity, a force that commanded the room. He repeated her words slowly, deliberately. Cult-like organization. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but somehow it was more chilling than any shout could have been. The studio seemed to hold its collective breath. "Jane," he began, each word deliberate, dripping with controlled fury. "Let me tell you something about courage. Real courage. Not the Hollywood version, not the publicity stunt version, but actual courage." He paused. The silence was suffocating. Courage isn't flying into enemy territory for a photo op will make the front page. Courage isn't grandstanding for cameras while real heroes are dying in rice paddies. Courage is taking responsibility for your actions and living with the consequences. Something you apparently have never learned to do. The audience froze. Even the camera operators hesitated, afraid to break the spell. A routine promotional interview had escalated into something deeply personal, raw, and unforgettable. Jane tried to regain control, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured." Tom cut her off mid-sentence, surgical in precision. "No, Jane, you're going to sit there and listen. Because for once, someone is going to tell you the truth without worrying about your feelings, your reputation, or your carefully constructed public image." His intensity rose, like a pressure cooker reaching its limit. Every eye in the studio was on him, captivated by the unfiltered honesty pouring out. "You want to talk about organizations? Fine. Let's talk about how you've spent decades lecturing everyone else about morality, ethics, and doing the right thing, while conveniently forgetting your own mistakes, while glossing over the things you did that actually hurt real people." The words landed like blows. Jane recoiled slightly, her confident facade cracking, revealing something far more fragile beneath. But Tom wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing with that trademark laser focus, voice steady and dangerous. "You know what really bothers me about people like you, Jane?" Tom Cruz leaned in, his gaze razor sharp, cutting through the studio's heavy tension. "You think that because you apologized once or twice in carefully crafted PR interviews, somehow that erases the damage you caused. You think that because you've reinvented yourself as this feminist icon, this activist for progressive causes, that everyone should forget that you gave aid and comfort to people literally torturing American prisoners of war." Whoopi Goldberg made one last, desperate attempt to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Tom, maybe we could talk about your upcoming projects," she suggested, voice strained with the effort of maintaining professionalism. "I know you have some exciting things in the works." Tom didn't even glance at her. His attention remained locked on Jane Fonda, whose hands trembled on the armrests, her face pale again. The fire she'd brought into the studio minutes ago had all but vanished. "And the absolute worst part," he continued relentlessly, "is that you've never truly owned up to what you did. Not really. You've made excuses, rationalized it, tried to reframe it as youthful idealism or political activism, whatever helps you sleep at night. But you've never simply said, 'I was wrong, I hurt people, and I am truly, deeply sorry.'" Jane reached weakly for her water glass, her voice barely a whisper. "I have apologized. I've said many times that I regret." "Regret?" Tom interrupted, each word striking like a blade. "You regret it? Like it was some minor social misstep? Like you accidentally wore the wrong dress to an award show?" He leaned further forward, intensity ratcheting up. "Jane, do you have any idea what it was like for the families of those prisoners to see you smiling and laughing with their captors? Do you understand the betrayal those soldiers felt, realizing someone from their own country, someone famous and influential, was giving propaganda victories to the people torturing them?" The cameras cut repeatedly between their faces, capturing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in tension and emotion. Jane looked like she wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear entirely. Meanwhile, Tom seemed to be hitting his stride, the full weight of his words building towards something even more devastating. "But here's what really gets me. he continued, voice rising again, every syllable sharp and deliberate. After all of that, the damage you caused, the pain you inflicted on real people and real families, you still have the audacity, the sheer breathtaking audacity to attack my beliefs, my choices, my integrity. You came in here with talking points ready, hoping to make me look bad on national television, to score cheap points with your political base. He paused, letting the words settle over the studio like a thick fog. You want to talk about organizations controlling people. You've been controlled by your own ego, your desperate need to stay relevant, so long that you've completely lost touch with basic human decency. Joy Behar finally spoke, though her voice was uncertain, almost apologetic. Tom, I think you're being a little harsh here. Tom's eyes snapped to her, his stare so intense that Joy leaned back in her chair. Joy, he said, deadly serious, let me ask you something. If someone in your family had been captured in Vietnam, tortured day after day, and somehow survived, broken and traumatized, how would they feel about Jane's little publicity stunt? Would you tell them they were being too harsh for being angry? The question hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Joy opened her mouth, realized she had no answer, and closed it again. The silence thickened, almost tangible, before Tom turned back to Jane. You know the real tragedy here, Jane. His tone softened slightly, but the cutting edge remained. You could have been a real force for good. You had a platform, influence, the ability to make a genuine difference in people's lives. But instead, you chose to become a symbol of everything wrong with celebrity activism. Personal publicity over principle. Self-promotion over service. Jane found her voice again, though weaker, defensive. That's not fair. I've spent my whole life fighting for causes. Women's rights, environmental issues, social justice. Tom's voice dripped with bitter mockery. Jane, showing up at a few rallies and giving speeches isn't fighting. You want to know what fighting really is? He leaned forward, eyes blazing. Fighting is what those soldiers were doing while getting shot at in the jungle, while you were posing for pictures with the people shooting at them. Fighting is what those families were doing, clinging to hope that their sons and husbands would come home, while you handed propaganda victories to the enemy. The studio was frozen, every eye riveted, every heartbeat echoing the intensity of the moment. That's fighting, Tom said, voice blazing. What you do is performance art. The audience sat spellbound. This was no longer a celebrity spat. It was a raw, unfiltered clash of worldviews, a collision of two completely different ideas of courage, principle, and responsibility. Everyone in the room felt the weight of it. Desperate, Jane tried a new tactic, reaching for moral high ground. At least I've evolved, she said, her voice gaining some strength. At least I've grown from my mistakes, learned from them. Can you say the same? Are you going to tell me your organization hasn't made mistakes? That it hasn't hurt people? Tom's expression hardened, and a slight smile of satisfaction flickered across his face. You want to talk about evolution, Jane? Let me tell you about real evolution, genuine growth. His voice rose with intensity, each word sharper than the last. Evolution is taking responsibility for your actions without excuses. Evolution is admitting when you're wrong without trying to justify it. Evolution is understanding that some things can't be undone, and the best you can do is try to live better going forward. He leaned in, eyes piercing. But what you've done isn't evolution, it's image rehabilitation. You've spent decades rewriting history, trying to make people forget what you really did, trying to position yourself as some wise elder stateswoman who learned valuable lessons from youthful mistakes. He shook his head firmly. Wisdom isn't learning to spin your failures, Jane. Wisdom is understanding the real cost of those failures. It's recognizing the human damage you caused and carrying that weight with humility. Jane's face crumpled. You don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, tears welling. You don't know what it was like back then. The pressure, the confusion. Tom cut her off sharply, voice razor-like. Jane, let me clear up your confusion. When your country is at war and your countrymen are dying, you don't fly to the enemy capital and pose for propaganda photographs. That's not confusing. That's not complicated. That's basic human decency, fundamental loyalty, common sense. He paused, then spoke again, quieter but even more intense. What bothers me isn't just what you did 50 years ago. It's how you've handled it since. You've made a career of being the victim. Poor Jane. I was young and idealistic. Poor Jane. I was manipulated. Poor Jane. Everyone was so mean when I was just trying to help end a war. Jane's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. That's not... No, Tom said, cutting through her protest. Here's the truth you've spent decades avoiding. You weren't a victim, Jane. The prisoners were victims. The families waiting at home were victims. The soldiers who returned to find that a Hollywood actress had handed propaganda victories to their captors. They were victims. You made a choice and refused to face the consequences, and you've been making excuses ever since. The studio fell silent. Camera operators froze. Sound engineers strained to catch every word. Every heartbeat seemed amplified. This was history in the making. Tom's voice climbed again, controlled fury and disbelief mingling. You want to lecture me about questionable choices? About my integrity, my judgment, my beliefs? He shook his head slowly, a mix of wonder and incredulity in his expression. Jane, you've spent more time rehabilitating your image than considering the real damage you caused. You've become a professional victim, convincing yourself it's true. And somehow you think that gives you the moral authority to judge others? Jane tried one last defense. I was trying to end a war that was killing people. I was trying to bring attention to something fundamentally wrong. Tom leaned in, eyes piercing. No, you were trying to get attention. Period. If your goal was to end the war, there were countless ways to do it without giving aid and comfort to the enemy. You could have protested at home, lobbied Congress, used your platform to raise awareness without traveling to Hanoi and posing for photographs. But those ways wouldn't have put you on the front page, would they? They wouldn't have made you the center of the story. And that's what you really wanted, to be the star of your own political drama, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The accusation hung like a thunderbolt. Jane's mouth opened and closed. No words came. Tears streamed freely, her carefully applied makeup running down her face. The studio was frozen, every eye fixed on her, every heartbeat holding the tension of a moment no one would forget. You want to know the difference between your choices and mine? Tom pressed on, relentless, merciless. My choices, my beliefs, my commitments, they're about helping people, about making things better, contributing something positive to the world. Your choice in Vietnam? That was about making yourself the center of attention in someone else's tragedy. And that's exactly what you're trying to do here today. Whoopi Goldberg made a final, desperate attempt to regain control. Maybe we should all take a breath here, she suggested weakly, glancing at the other hosts. Maybe we need to. But Tom was unstoppable now. His intensity filled the studio. You know what I find most telling about this entire exchange, Jane? His voice now carried genuine disappointment, laced with anger. You started this conversation attacking my beliefs, my choices, my integrity. You came in here with talking points ready, hoping to make me look bad on national television, ready to score cheap political points. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But the instant someone turned the spotlight back on you, the moment you were asked to account for your own actions, you completely fell apart. Your whole righteous crusade collapsed like a house of cards. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. It's easy to throw stones when you think you're standing on the moral high ground. It's much harder when someone reminds you that your own house is made of glass. Jane looked utterly defeated. Her earlier self-righteous certainty had vanished, replaced by a deep, almost palpable shame. She shrank into her chair, unable to meet Tom's gaze, the cameras, or even the other hosts. "And here's what really makes me sad," Tom continued, voice softening slightly but retaining all its power. "You could have used this moment differently, Jane. You could have acknowledged your mistakes honestly, shown humility, used your platform to actually help people instead of tearing others down to feel morally superior." He shook his head slowly. "But instead, you came in here to tear someone else down. That's just sad." The camera captured Jane's face, a mix of shock and despair. Her defenses had crumbled. Years of rehearsed justifications and image rehabilitation lay in ruins. "That's what people like you never understand," Tom said, disappointment and pity evident in his tone. "Real strength isn't attacking others to make yourself look good. Real courage isn't tearing people down to build yourself up. Real integrity is owning your mistakes honestly and trying to do better, not spending decades making excuses and pointing fingers." Joy Behar weakly tried to defend Jane. "Jane has done a lot of good work over the years. She supported important causes." Tom's piercing stare turned to her. Has she? Or has she just done work that makes her look good? There's a difference, Joy. A fundamental difference between genuinely helping people and just appearing to help for the cameras. He turned back to Jane, whose hands now rested in her lap, tears silently falling onto her dress. "Jane, I want you to think about something. When you're alone tonight, ask yourself one honest question." He paused. The studio held its breath. In all these years, in all these interviews, all these public appearances where you've talked about Vietnam and expressed regrets, have you ever truly thought about those prisoners and their families as real people instead of obstacles to your image rehabilitation? The words landed like a physical blow. Jane flinched, shoulders hunched as though struck. For a moment, it seemed she might collapse entirely on camera. "Because that's what this is really about," Tom continued mercilessly, giving her no time to recover. "This isn't politics. This isn't about organizations. It isn't about who's right or wrong about the war. This is about basic human empathy, about understanding that your actions have consequences for real people, not your career, your reputation, or your place in history, but actual human beings who suffered because of your choices." He leaned back, voice firm, final. "So, before you question anyone else, before you challenge anyone else's integrity, beliefs, or choices, maybe spend some serious time examining your own. Figure out whether you're actually trying to help people or just trying to make yourself feel better about the things you did wrong." The studio was silent. The weight of his words hung in the air. Jane sat defeated, motionless, unable to respond, unable to move, tears flowing freely, the full impact of the confrontation written across her face. The other hosts glanced around desperately, each silently hoping someone would figure out a way to end this nightmare, to salvage what was left of the show. For what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Whoopi found her voice. She cleared her throat, looking straight into the camera, her professional mask barely holding. "Well," she said, tone strained and uneven, "this has certainly been an interesting conversation. Tom, thank you for being here with us today." But Tom Cruz wasn't finished. Not yet. He turned his gaze directly to the camera, that legendary intensity filling the studio, speaking not to the host but to millions watching at home. "The truth is," he said, every word deliberate, "people can attack my beliefs, my choices, my lifestyle all they want. That's their right. But at the end of the day, I can sleep at night knowing that I've never betrayed my country. I've never given aid and comfort to enemies who were torturing American prisoners. And I've never spent decades making excuses for inexcusable behavior." He paused, letting his words settle like a weight across the studio. And I think that's a pretty good place to start any conversation about integrity, character, and doing the right thing. With that, he stood, walked to Whoopi, shook her hand with perfect politeness, nodded respectfully to the other hosts, and strode off the set with his head held high. Behind him, he left what was easily the most uncomfortable, most devastating moment in daytime television history. Jane Fonda remained seated, staring at her hands, tears still streaming. Slowly, she lifted her eyes to the camera, her expression a mixture of defeat, disbelief, and resignation. The woman who had arrived ready for battle, armed with talking points and righteous indignation, had been utterly dismantled. Everyone in the studio, in the control room, and in millions of homes across America witnessed it. The cameras finally cut to commercial, but the damage had been done. The moment was immortalized, captured in high definition for anyone who wanted to see what happens when someone tries to attack one of Hollywood's most disciplined and prepared performers, only to discover they've brought a knife to a gunfight. What began as a routine promotional interview had become something entirely different. A masterclass in composure, a lesson in turning an attack back on the attacker, and a stark reminder that some wounds from history never fully heal, no matter how much time passes or how many apologies are offered. For days afterward, the question dominated social media and news coverage. Did Tom Cruise go too far? Or did he simply voice what millions had been thinking for decades but were too polite to say? Whatever the answer, one thing was indisputable. This was a moment that would live on in television history, unforgettable, unflinching, and impossible to ignore.